Hello, and welcome back to More Math. So in our previous video, we talked about rational numbers, and we're going to continue that discussion. Right now, we're going to talk about what is the absolute value of a rational number. I'm sure you watched that video before, but if you didn't, go back and do it. We're going to do a real quick review about absolute value. Make sure you have a pencil and a paper. It's so much more interesting if you follow along instead of just kind of like sit and stare, right? Boring. Do it with me. All right. So absolute value, if you recall, we said what is absolute value? It is the distance from zero. You just need to know that. That's one of those things you want to get in your brain and just keep it there. Absolute value just means how far is it from zero. So if I said -7, how far is -7 from zero? Well, if I drew a number line, here we have 0, here's -7. How far is it from here to here? It is 7 units. So we can say the absolute value, remember these two lines mean absolute value, the absolute value of 7 is 7. And since it's a distance, the big point we know is that absolute value is always positive. And we did our little cheer and we said, hey, absolute value is always positive. So we're going to remember the absolute value is always positive because it's telling me how far away it is. So we did that with integers. Now let's talk about rational numbers. So we can do the exact same thing with a rational number. And remember, we said a rational number is any number that can be written as a over b. It can be written as a fraction. B can't be 0. I know you know that. You watched the other video. All right. So we're going to say the absolute value is what? Let's say we have 1.5. Here's my 1.5. What is the absolute value of that? How far is that from 0? It is 1.5 units from 0. That's all it is. The absolute value of 1.5 is 1.5 because it's 1.5 units from 0. Okay, well, what is the absolute value of -2 3/4? What's the absolute value of that? How far is that from 0? It is 2 3/4 unit. So the absolute value of 2 3/4, I lied, a -2 3/4. The absolute value of a -2 3/4 equals, how far is it? 2 3/4. That's all it is. So when we're finding the absolute value of a rational number, all we're doing is we are keeping the number and making the sign positive. Keep the number, make the sign positive. We never have a negative absolute value. That's it. We talked about absolute value first because it's a great introduction right in here to our opposites. And again, we had another video on this. Works the same way. What are the opposites of a rational number? Well, let's pick a rational number. How about 1.5? Here is 1.5. 1 1/2. How far is 1.5 from 0? And we answered that when we talked about absolute value, that it's just the distance, right? The distance is 1.5. Now I want to know what is the opposite of 1.5. The opposite is the same number on the other side of 0. It's the same distance, but on the other side of 0. So here we're going to go to a -1 1/2. So this is 1 1/2 units from 0. The opposite is also 1 1/2 units from 0. It just happens to be on the other side. That just sounds really hard. How do you make that really easy? The opposite of 1 1/2 is a -1 1/2. We keep the number because that's how far it is from 0, and we change the sign. By definition, the opposite is keeping the number, changing the sign. It's the distance from 0 on the other side. So let's try another one just to make sure we know how this works. What if I said 3/4? So here's 3/4. What is the opposite of 3/4? Well, how far from 0 is 3/4? That's right. It is 3/4 of 1 unit. So how far is 3/4 on the other side? 1, 2, 3, right to here. That would be a -3/4. Don't overthink this. Opposites are super easy. What is the opposite of 1/2? Of a negative 1/2? The opposite is just 1/2. If we have 7 and 2/3, what is the opposite of 7 and 2/3? A negative 7. Oops, and 2/3. Keep the number, change the sign. That's all it is for opposites. Just a quick reminder, pretty much the same thing we had done before. Just wanted to point out we do the exact same thing when we have a fraction or a decimal. It's the same thing. Have a good day.